All right, listen up, listen up. They said 3 times is a charm. So again, let's see what we can do here, okay? I am Coach Shaterial Starnes, and other half of Hustle to Business University. I'm also a financial literacy coach. So can you hear now?
I hear you. Finally, somebody do not want us to get this message out, but we getting it out.
Crazy. So we are definitely, guys, we don't know what's going on, but please just be patient with us. Come back in. And again, we are so sorry. Sometimes we're at the mercy of technology, but we're going to figure out a different platform because obviously Facebook Live is not working for us. Okay. Y'all come on in, because we got some good information today. I am Coach Shaterial Starnes, financial literacy coach. And I'm also, hi, Jacqueline. Hello. Can you hear us? Can you hear? Can you hear?
I can hear you.
April, can you hear? They
April.
were, Tommy, and some of them were saying that they couldn't hear us. So I was just making sure that they can hear.
Hopefully this time it's going to be all good because I'm telling you.
Yes,
okay,
Ashley, we can hear. Woo, woo. Okay, let's get this going, okay? So I am Coach Shaterial Starnes, financial literacy coach of the Starnes Group, and I'm also the other half of Hustle to Business University. And we have my partner in crime, Masheka Turner, on here as well.
Good afternoon.
Masheka, please introduce yourself.
I am Masheka Turner. I am the owner of Bright Skies Business Services and the other half of Hustle to Business. So finally, we in the room, so we're going to go on and get started before somebody try to kick us out the room again.
Exactly. So guys, we're going to jump right in. One of the things is that when we initially started the group, or when Masheka started the group, because I came on a little bit later, she talked about business structures. And the group has grown so much, Masheka, since that point that we really feel like we need to revisit because we're still seeing the same things. And in fact, I had a client the other day, and he has an LLC, and I asked him, I said, why do you have an LLC? And he really couldn't tell me. And he said, also, there is so much information out there that it's almost sometimes contradictory, and he didn't quite know if he was even supposed to have an LLC. And he said he sees a lot of things on Facebook, just like you and I talked about, that there's this thing that are push to get certain business structures, and it may not be the right one for you. So the whole point of this is to revisit that because we're seeing these same things over and over again. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Masheka?
I definitely want to. So this topic comes up a lot in my business. It comes up a lot. And so I'm really excited about talking about the differences and talking about some different scenarios. And ironically, I talked to someone just this week that is an LLC. He's been an LLC, I think 2 years, but he has not filed the charter. Yes, he filed it the first time, but he has not filed it or did anything else since. So even though you may be an LLC, technically and legally you're not, because you have not fulfilled the requirements to be an LLC.
So maybe we need to go back to the beginning and go through the different structures and talk a little bit about that, because people are like, hey, Miss Bernice, they have no idea what a charter is.
Yeah. Before we get into this, I'm gonna pick on you a little bit too. I'm like, Robert, where are your earrings? You got where's
your earrings at? Because he said I did a post and I had on these glasses because I love these little Dollar Tree. Hey, Richard. Hey, I love these little Dollar Tree glasses and they're so colorful. So he said, he said, it's the glasses and the earrings for me. And I said, I should have worn them just for him if I knew he was going to be in here. You know he's supposed to have So we're going to dive right in, Shika, because we know this is little foolishness and nonsense going on with this technology. Yes, so can we talk a little bit about the business structures that we're going to discuss today?
Sure.
And we'll break
so today we're going to keep it very simple. So today we're going to mostly talk about sole props or sole proprietors, LLCs, S corps, and partnerships. And we're going to keep it very surface level, just answering some of the questions. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that I see.
Yes.
Now let me say this: we are not giving any legal or accounting advice. We're just talking about the structures.
Yes.
And so, of course, if there's any strategies or anything that you want to go full throttle with, please talk to your CPA or your lawyer about doing so. We're just telling you about what it is and how it works.
And we
And
also have some resources, Masheka, about people that we can refer them to where if they want to take a deeper dive. But again, this is very surface level, so don't just make sure that we want to make sure that you have an understanding of what the deal is.
right. And we definitely have a resource that we will drop in the comments about getting all of this set up. But like
Yes.
I said, for this conversation, it's basically explaining what it is so that you will be able to intelligently determine what is the right structure for you.
Good, good, good.
All righty. So let's go into it. So the first option and the most common and the easiest thing to do would be a sole proprietor. And what that is basically you say, I want to go in business, and you go down, and most counties usually have something. You get a business license and you're a sole proprietor. Now, for the IRS purposes, if you start selling something, even if you don't have your paperwork together, you are a sole proprietor in their eyes, and they want you filing taxes on it. Now, we know sometimes that don't always happen, but if you start selling something or charging money for a service, you are in fact a sole proprietor. And basically, just what that looks like, you've set up a business structure and under the business name. And so usually the bank accounts and all of that, they will have the business name on them. But this is the deal with sole proprietor. That means the business is solely in your name, and any liability associated with the business is going to fall on you too. Particularly like if a business is sued, because you are a sole proprietor, that business is in your personal name, and that means any suits or anything like that, any personal assets you have will be up for grabs, because the business is solely, because you're a sole proprietor, the business is in your name. So there is no corporate veil there. Do you have any questions about that before I go into an LLC?
And then I want to add something else to that as well.
Go ahead.
Hi, Deanna, how are you? Another thing is that when you are also thinking about you're setting up your business structure, you really should take in consideration long term. Do you want to have shareholders? Do you want to transfer the business? Do you want to sell it? And one thing about a sole prop is that it's hard to transfer. You see what I'm saying? It's difficult to transfer, and also a lot of the funds, everything is tied up with you as the owner. And just as Masheka was saying, like, listen, if there's a liability, you're going to be held responsible. But they're very easy to set up, and more often than not, a lot of times all you need is a business license to get started, other than having you need a business bank account and things like that. And from the business credit standpoint, I will tell you this. Hey, Kisa, I will tell you this, that you can have a sole prop and open up business credit, okay? But depending on where you plan on taking your business, you need to be mindful of that. And it might be okay for you to start there, but you really need to start looking at other structures if you plan on growing and all these other things, okay? Because the liability is huge with a sole prop.
Right. And so she's exactly right. It depends on what you're doing. And like I say, it is the easiest way to get going. But usually once you start making money and things kick off, a lot of people do not stay there long. So that's that. All right. So the LLC part, and I'm going to try to break this down to make this not confusing. So the LLC part. So first you actually have a different one. So you have an LLC, and then you have an LLC with an S corp selection. Let's just start with a single member LLC for now. So basically it works mostly like a sole prop, but the difference is, so the business is in your name, but the liability as far as lawsuits and things like that go, it's a veil between you and the business. So you have the sole prop where the business is in your name. You have the LLC where the business is in your name, but the assets belong to the business, which means that any liabilities or anything like that belong to the business because it has put a veil between you and the business. So, and it's a scenario. Say someone owns a lawn service and a blade flies off and hits somebody in the leg. If that business is an LLC, if someone wanted to sue that business, they can only sue the business and the assets. Only the assets of the business in the LLC will be up for grabs, not the owner of the business. His personal home, his personal savings, anything that he has will not be up for grabs. The only thing that will be up for grabs are the things that are held in the LLC assets. And you guys, please ask questions along the way, because I really want this group to be a resource, and I really want us to answer these questions. And even though y'all get quiet when we go live, I know this is a real thing because everywhere I go, I see this question. So right now is a great time to ask these questions, and we will answer what we can. And we have a lot of resources for the questions that we can't answer. And we also have a connection to help you get yours set up right. So please ask any questions that you have. Shaterial, do you have anything that you want to add about LLCs?
I just want people to be mindful of that with LLCs, that there are filing fees that are in place. There are a lot of different things. And what happens is that you have people that will go out and they will get an LLC and not understanding all of the other things that are needed to keep it in place. So let me give you a prime example. Had someone to file, open up an LLC, and then when it came time to, there was some filing fees and some other things that need to be taken care of and other things that need to be put in place. And because they did not pay the fees, that was or could not afford to pay the fees, that was a hindrance. And what happened is that when all of the payment protection program and the EIDL, the economic injury disaster loans became available, they couldn't even apply because guess what? They were not able to pay the fees, and they didn't have all these other things in place where the business was set up. And just as you said before, Masheka, that yeah, you may have a business, but if you haven't paid all these fees and things and that and third, you really don't have a business. And what happened is that they missed out on all of that, the opportunities and that free money. You understand what I'm saying? So these things are critical. You know, it's certain things like you mentioned, your client hadn't filed their charter. And then people are like, can you talk a little bit about what is a charter and what does that mean, and some of the different things that have to be filed with these corporations?
Yes. So first thing too, I'm gonna say most of our members are in Tennessee. We actually have a couple of overseas members. So everything that we're talking about is regarded to the United States. So let me say that. And I'm actually going to post in the link the requirements for all 50 states for an LLC. So I'm going to use Tennessee because that's where mostly everybody is at for our purposes. But I will post a link to show you the requirements for every state. But let's get back to Tennessee for an example. So if you have an LLC in Tennessee, you are required to do an annual charter. Right now it's $300 a year. And you have to do that annual. It's an annual report is what it's called. Also, in the state of Tennessee, they have a franchise and excise tax. So once you file your federal taxes, Usually you take those numbers and you can go into the state's website. It's called 10-tap, and you can fill out your franchise and excise tax. Now, I'm not going to go too much into this, but depending on what county you have, there also may be some other things depending on what county. But for Davidson County, as an example, there's something called a city business tax. So you would also fill that in. So when you log in to your 10-tap account, there's the franchise and excise, there's a city business tax, and then there's also the annual charter that you have to do yearly for the state of Tennessee. All states do not require that, but I am going to I'm going to put that in the chat, and it'll be a listing for the requirements for all states. So a lot of times when we talk about LLC, we typically talk about it for tax purposes, federal, but there are some things that you have to do for the state. Also, let me say this about an LLC, the ways that is similar to a sole proprietor. Whatever your personal income tax rate is, if you have just an LLC with no selection, your business is going to be subject to the same rate as a pass-through on your. So basically what happens is, if you're an LLC, say you're married and your household tax rate is at 35%. What happens with your LLC that does not have a selection, it's also taxed at 35%, whatever your personal tax rate is. So what happens is, when you file your joint tax returns, there's going to be the stuff at the top of what you had personally. So if someone had a job or whatever, or all of that's going to be at the top. And then there's going to be a section for the business. And then whatever your personal rate is what the business rate is going to be. Did you have any questions about that?
So you're basically, what you're saying is that if you do not make a selection when you file for your LLC, that it can be taxed at whatever rate you're taxed on your personal taxes. So you might be paying more than what you should have. Let's see. Someone says, do you know what happens when you become an LLC when it comes to retirement? I've heard that if you invest in your retirement, you have to offer retirement benefits to your employees.
So that right there is a question outside of the scope of this, but I will make sure that I get your question answered, because there are some things around that. But like I say, for that question, it's a little bit outside of this scope. So I want to make sure that we answer that question specifically, and because there are some different scenarios around that question.
And Keisha, what I'll do is after Masheka reaches out, gets the information on it, I'll circle back to you to make sure you have that information, and then we'll also post it in the group because somebody else may have that question. And please know, guys, one of the things too is that just because you're not an LLC now, or you haven't faced these situations, it doesn't mean that they will not come back. So that's why it's really good to come back to the group and pose questions, because you're probably going to face them at some point, depending on what your business structure is.
And so let me say this too. A lot of times I've heard people say, well, I became an LLC to save money on my taxes. And that really has nothing to do with it. If you are a LLC with no selection, it has nothing to do with taxes, because whatever your personal tax rate is what the LLC tax rate is going to be. The LLC is mostly liability protection. So we need to understand what we're talking about when we're doing these selections, and because once you go and file that paperwork or file it online, or whether you go down there, whatever you do, once you file it, the ball starts rolling, and then you are legally required to do the things to satisfy those. So we just want to make sure that we know what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I know right now there are a lot of social media business experts that's telling you to open up an LLC, and you running out and doing stuff and not knowing why you're doing it. And just know that
and get yourself in a
there's
whole lot
usually
of
a
trouble and be out of a lot of debt unnecessarily. You know, hi Summer, hi Richard. Something else I want to say, Masheka, like in terms of filing structures, like business structure. I went to a a brunch and I spoke to some ladies about business credit. And some of them had questions because they were doing hair, they were doing things that were they were afraid that they can be sued. Would you recommend that somebody not I mean in terms of like a sole prop versus a LLC or something where they're kind of protecting themselves? What would you recommend that people in certain specific types of industries actually file like an LLC or go that route? What do you suggest?
So your voice dropped a little bit, but what I think I heard you say is there certain industries that it's better to do an LLC for versus
Yes,
sole prop? Is that the question?
yes, absolutely.
Okay, so
Because people are
I'll say
confused about
this.
that. They're like, well, I don't know which one I should do, and so on. And not to say that
Right,
we're telling you which one, but yeah.
right. So probably the simplest thing to start with is how much exposure is the activity that you're doing. So there are some businesses that you're going to be more exposed to than others. I mean, of course, everybody, especially as the business grow, is going to have to start thinking about protection. But for now, so like for example, if you're selling a product that you're making in your home, well, if somebody puts that product on and gets a reaction to it, or you never know what could happen. That right there is something that's going to leave you more exposed. Someone like that may think about doing an LLC, so only the business assets are up rather than their personal. It may be someone that just maybe doing some kind of task where they're running errands for people, in their own personal car. It's a little side business. Maybe something like that. They just think, okay, I just need to get started for now, and I'm going to do a sole prop just so I can have a business. So there are different scenarios, but usually it starts with how much exposure there is.
Gotcha. So again, it's not just money, it's exposure. That's probably the higher priority. That makes perfect sense. So as an example, if you make less than 10,000 and 10,000 a year, or you think you're gonna make less than 10,000, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna do the sole prop route. What we're saying is that look at your exposure in terms of how your assets being like, or the ability of your being able to be sued. Like I have a service-based business. Okay, so it's a little different because I'm selling services. Not to say that there can't still be any liability, but if I'm doing somebody's hair, putting in perms, and all these different things like that, a hairstylist or an esthetician, things like that, you may want to really think that through in terms of your business structure because again, there's a liability. You don't want nobody coming in and taking your stuff that you done work hard for. You understand what I'm saying?
All right, so I'm going to go into the last two. I'm not going to go too much into them because I can't hardly hear you, but I'm going to keep going. So the last one is or next to the last is a S corp. So you guys have keep hearing me saying selection. So this is what I mean by that. So there's an LLC, but you can opt to do a LLC with a S corp selection. And what that is where you're still the owner of the business, but you become an employee of the business. Now, what that means is you have to pay yourself a reasonable compensation, meaning that you just can't say, I'm gonna pay myself $100 a month. No, it has to be a reasonable compensation based on the work that you're doing in the business. Now it gets dicey because your reasonable may not be my reasonable. So there's been a lot of conversations for years about what exactly is reasonable compensation. Compensation. But for our purposes, we're just going to talk about what it is. So if you elect to become an S corp, what that looks like is you are an LLC, but you are an employee of the business. What do employees get? They get paychecks. So you can't just write yourself $1,000 check and say that's your paycheck. No, it needs to go through payroll where you pay FICA taxes, where you pay employer taxes, where you actually pay like you are an employee. And just getting back to the tax side, the reason why some people choose to start going into the S Corp is so that they can drop that self-employment tax that you pay when you are an LLC or a sole proprietor. I'm not going to go too much into that because it gets outside of the scope, but it really can be a tax savings. So most of the time when people start going into S Corps, usually they want the protection, but they also want more tax savings. Now, it has to make sense. And the reason why I say this is most people say 50,000 or more net income for it to make sense. Because otherwise, when you get through with the filings, when you get through shaking it out with the state, it's really not going to be worth it. But for instance, this is what it looks like. Say if I'm an employee, say if I'm a business owner, say if my net income is $100,000. If I'm a LLC with no selection, $100,000 is gonna go on my tax return. That's what I'm gonna be taxed on. Say I'm a S Corp and my net income is $100,000. Well, if I choose to pay myself as an employee $50,000, then that $100,000 goes down to $50,000. So then I'm taxed on the $50,000 rather than the $100,000, because when you're an LLC or a sole prop, it doesn't recognize your draws. It only recognizes net income. But when you are an S Corp, you're paying yourself as an employee. And let me just say this. Typically, when your business starts to grow and you start to look at funding and other opportunities, banks typically love to see you paying yourself as an employee, because it tells them two things. One thing, it tells that you have a sustainable business to pay yourself, but also it lets them know that you make enough money to actually do it. So if you make enough money to actually pay yourself, they like, this is somebody that can possibly pay back the loan, which greater your chances of getting funding. And guys, I know that this is not sexy fun stuff. And I feel that as I'm speaking about it, but I feel like it's so necessary.
It is, because it's a lot of bad information out there. You understand what I'm saying? It's a lot of bad information. So we want to make sure that we break this stuff down so you can understand it, and it's not too complicated. So we got to make sure that our folks are setting our stuff up right, because even she could. Oh, do you also want to talk about, like, with corporations? Can you also transfer, and is it easy to transfer and sell as well? And if you have shareholders, because that's something to think about in the future, right?
I didn't quite hear you, but I'm sorry, Shaterial, I didn't even, I heard bits and pieces of it, but you kind of break it up. So I'm gonna go into partnerships, since okay. That's the, okay. And I am so sorry, guys, and we're gonna find out some other way to do this, because yes. I'm about sick of this. But anyway, let's go into partnerships. So the partnerships can be treated the same way. So there is a general partnership, or you can go into a joint venture partnership or operational partnership. But let's just talk about it. So say if you just go into a general partnership, it's like the sole proprietor. You know, say if Shaterial and I are 50-50 partners and we just go as a general partnership, that means that same thing. We are responsible for taxes on the net income of the business. So if we 50-50, she taxed 50%, I'm taxed 50%. Any business debts, same thing. But same thing, if a business is sued and there is no corporate bail, that means that my assets are up for grab, my personal assets can be up for grab, and her personal assets can be up for grab. So you want to think about that. Now, this right here part is very important. Of course, we want to, once we start going into LLCs, and you can do the same thing. The LLC structure, only difference is it's going to be a partnership. But this is the most important part. You have to have an operating agreement. Most of the time, the bank will not even allow you to open a bank account without an operating agreement of the terms of the partnership. So I'm going to say this, even though it's elementary, I'm going to say this. A partnership is not shaking hands and doing business. That's not a partnership. That's not a partnership. And when things go wrong is when that really comes about. But you really want to get an operating agreement with the plans laid out, who put in how much money, what the responsibilities are going to be. You want to have it all laid out. If something happens, if somebody is not able to come back to the business, if somebody passes, whatever, you want to have all of that laid out if you're planning on a partnership with someone. And like I said, there are different types of partnerships, and we can definitely get some information about the different types. But I basically wanted to just talk about business structure, because we're talking a lot. We're talking a lot about business structures, and Shaterial brought up key man policy. So I don't go too much into it, but I'll talk about that part too. So basically how that works, and ironically, I'm actually working on that in my business, Bright Skies, but we're also working on that for Hustle the Business. But another thing that's great about partnerships, and a lot of people look at, is a key man policy. And basically what that looks like is an insurance policy on the partner. So say if someone don't make it back the next day, you could cash that policy in and buy someone out and so there, you could pay that out to their estate. So that right there definitely makes it easier with these partnerships. If you can have that key man policy in place, you can pay the money out to that person's estate and go on about your day, versus trying to figure out, is this going to be a family member stepping in? Who's going to deal with their estate? Because all of these things are real if you decide to go into partnership. And do you guys have any questions? Like I say, I almost gave up on this, but while I'm here, we're going to keep on talking. Can you have one? You absolutely can have a key man policy for your employees. And surprisingly, I learned about it. So I've been knowing about the policy, but I kept putting it off. And then I finally was like, I'm going to do it. It actually is much cheaper than you think it is. So I challenge you, if this is something that you're thinking about in your business, to go ahead and get a quote, because it's not as much as you think it is. And I actually happen to know someone on this live that does have a business partner. So you definitely will want to look into that key man policy. Besides Shaterial, I should say. Does anybody else have any questions? Let's see. Okay, yes. So actually getting into key man policies too, which this conversation done got a little bit off, but most employers do have them on you. So if you don't wake up the next day and come back to work, the people gonna miss you, but they're gonna get paid too. So please know that that they usually have it, but usually that's something as small business owners that we don't always think about. And one of my goals is to really help business owners create businesses that serve them. And so in doing that, it really makes me think about how we have to make provision for ourselves, because our retirement, our investments, growing our business, if we don't do that for ourselves, it doesn't get done. And so part of creating a business that really serves you is not only getting those legal things in place, getting those financial things in place, but getting a business in place that is reliable and not just reliant on you. So those are a lot of things that I tend to think about. And like Shaterial said, if somebody did offer you a lot of money for your business, if it's already structured where you are not the business and it's properly structured, that's going to be an easier transition. So there's a lot going on here, and you do have to do it brave, but you have to do it legal, and you have to do it right too. So all righty, Shaterial, did you have anything else? Because I feel like I'm just rambling on here.
Not at all.
Okay, I actually heard that. So you guys have a awesome, safe, you hear me? Safe holiday weekend. And we will see you guys next Friday. And if anybody know of any platforms that we can check out, please throw it in the chat, because as my sister always say, this right here ain't getting the baby no milk. I'm not feeling it. We got to figure out something. See you guys later. Bye.